All right, welcome everybody. It is this is March, right? Yes, we are in March for the latest edition of the CAR-PGA virtual panels. I'm your host, Mike Tresca, and I'm a chair member, a board member, and I'm the committee chair. So we're here to, as we have been doing every month, to host an exciting guest to talk about the latest and greatest news around role-playing and the greater sphere around role-playing. But before we get to that, two thoughts that I wanted to share, partially because they're top of mind, partially because as I work on role-playing game content, it's certainly coming up as questions for me. And for those of you who follow the work I write on EndWorld, you'll see that clearly that train of thought is following through. The first one is, we all know about the open game license controversy that happened under Wizards of the Coast and a lot of the concerns that were raised there. But one of them was really around the idea that the content in the open game license is essentially unmonitored and could potentially damage the brand, be it Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, or somewhere else in there. And because of that, the nature of the open game license, meaning that you give up, it's open, and you give up control. And a few groups have come up with some solutions to that, which is essentially creating rating systems for the products. And I think there's probably something in there that the CAR-PGA may have a point of view. So we welcome that. I'm happy to expound on that in an article, but it's something to think about, which is, what would the CAR-PGA say if there were guidelines, were the things that we would endorse or wouldn't endorse based on that? Because I think, in a lot of ways, role-playing is about to undergo a shift as it's become tremendously popular, as the movie industry did, where you get increased scrutiny. But you also get an opportunity to either have someone tell you what is appropriate or not, or provide a tool to do it. And to date, it's really been through platforms like DriveThruRPG. So I think there's opportunities to sort of not make it just about the platform, but also to talk about what an industry-wide standard might look like. And again, I'm not saying that we would be the ones who would do that. Maybe we endorse it. Maybe there are certainly proposals out there. So I'll definitely talk more about that. The other thing I wanted to talk about that's top of mind is the large learning tools, the AI. It's not really called AI exactly. That is essentially ChatGPT leading the way, these are products that use what I call human interface language. They sound and write as if it was not a robot, but like a person. And they answer any question you want. And I've been experimenting with a lot of role-playing content, and including converting content from one edition of Dungeons and Dragons to another, including writing up descriptions and general concepts for characters, creating characters from scratch. And it's been a very interesting and uneven experience. It's been amazing. It sort of opens up a Pandora's box of possibilities, but it is not sourced, and it is very difficult to prove where it got it from, this is the same controversy that's affected the AI space with art. So two pretty hot topics, I think, that are worth discussing in the CAR-PGA. So I wanted to bring those up now, and we will of course revisit those. We're not going to discuss them further than this, but I'll address them in my letter as well. So that was just a little bit of an aside. I wanted to just bring that up, and now turn our attention to Dr. Megan Connell, who we invited. Hello. I'm going to pin you on the chat here. I know, now you're like, great, now I'm pinned on the chat. We wanted to get you on to discuss. We had talked about this actually for a little bit, and we were very excited to have you. Thank you for agreeing to be on.
My pleasure, and apologies for the fits of coughing. I will try to mute before I cough. I am getting over a cold.
No problem. At this point, almost every one of us is, I think, actually, from what I've heard, it's that season. But we did time this. We timed this in anticipation of your book, which we will talk about. And you've helpfully, I see it in the back there, which is fantastic. But thank you so much for joining. So I'm very excited to have you. I know this is certainly top of mind. Timing's great with the Dungeons and Dragons movie coming out. And but usually the way we start when we engage, just to sort of get us grounded in sort of your background, is sort of I've read your bio, obviously, talking about gaming. If you could expound a little bit more on that and sort of how you came to tabletop gaming, that would be great.
Yeah, so I started playing tabletop games when I was in middle school. So this was back in the 90s. We did not have character sheets. We had lined notebook paper that we filled out. I don't even know what edition of D&D we're playing because we didn't really play. We just made characters and talked about how cool our characters would be and how amazing they would look. And I think we did like 2, maybe 3 games total. But it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. Took a very, very long hiatus from gaming through high school, college, grad school. And then it was in probably 2016, I saw Will Wheaton's Ashes of Valhalla on Geek and Sundry, and it reminded me of how much I had enjoyed those times in middle school. And so my family, we started playing the Fantasy Age system. Then we bought the starter set for D&D and started playing D&D, and I have not looked back. I play in a weekly group. We meet every week. It was a bunch of random people who just all got connected on Roll20. We formed a group for that, and we have been playing together every week since January of 2017.
Wow. That's great. And was that on? So that was Roll20, meaning it's virtual.
Mm-hmm.
It's online.
Yep, it's a virtual group, and so we were a bunch of strangers, but we became friends. Like my kids were the flower girls for my DM's wedding.
Oh wow!
So yeah, like very good friends. And so like I play a lot, and then through playing, I started realizing I was gaining insights into some stuff I needed to work on and some psychological growth points for myself. And so I wanted to start using it as a therapy tool. And I heard Dr. Boca Mazzaro on Dragon Talk talking about how at Aspiring Youth, they were using D&D to teach social skills. And so I got connected with him and started learning more about what he was doing and started running my own groups. I actually don't focus on social skills so much as teaching assertiveness training, cooperation, and creative problem solving. My groups tend to be for women and girls, but I've also run groups for other folks as well.
Interesting. So obviously you had the gaming background and you saw the bridge there. Now, did that start? I mean, was it immediately jumping into the formal connection, or was it sort of like, creatively incorporating? I mean, it's always interesting, right? I think this is probably flipped, but it used to be role playing was sort of something you did in drama and theater and maybe therapy, right? But to say, oh, role playing is gaming, but now that's starting to change. I think people may be like, if you hit RPG or role playing, they go, oh, you mean the game? But it is interesting to see them bridge right now that you're talking about, obviously, maybe different, maybe related, but they come together. So how did that come together for you?
Well, so for me, it was just, I don't know, there was something freeing about playing the character. And it was something I wanted to explore. And so my first several groups were more preliminary groups, just to be like, is this viable?
Right.
Do we actually see results from playing? And I started getting feedback from my players that they were making notable, significant changes in their day-to-day lives that we'd been hoping they would make in individual therapy, but they hadn't. And the only thing that had changed was I started playing the therapy, the D&D where we had the therapeutic bent to it. And so I felt like it was proof of concept, and then started really working on how do we get goals, what's best practices, how do we build a therapeutic encounters, how do we get people to practice the skills that we want through the game and get them to go out and do this in their lives. And so it was absolutely incredible to see the growth and development that happened. And it's one of the things in my book, like I think my subtitle for the book is like, I made mistakes so you don't have to. Because though it was being used as a tool for teaching social skills, I don't think anybody else at the time was actually using it as a therapy tool. Now, I might be wrong because we hadn't always connected with each other very well, but most of the groups, it was teaching social skills. And so I was the first one to really, I think, start talking about how can we treat anxiety using tabletop role-playing games. And it really did seem to help, and it took off from there, and it's just kind of exponentially grown since then. There's been a lot of learning, and that's how, again, the book came to be. It's like, all right, I figured out this didn't work, but this worked. This kind of works, but this works better over here. And so bringing all of those different tools together.
And now, I had this question I wrote down. So was it through Leyline Geek Therapeutics that expanded, or what was your connection with that?
So I helped to found Leyline Geek Therapeutics. I'm on the board. I
Okay,
actually came up with the name Leyline
excellent.
because I thought it was a cool imagery and we could have different nodes of connection through that. But because I am a really big fantasy nerd. And no, I had been running my own 10-week training program, which I still do on occasion. But I brought a lot of that into the therapeutic game master certification program that Leyline does. I helped to really create that whole program, record a lot of the trainings, develop a lot of the trainings, come up with the exam questions, like all of that kind of stuff. And I do help with some supervision, and I'm going to be doing more supervision of clinicians coming up through Leyline.
That's fantastic. So this isn't, I mean, obviously the book is part of a larger effort.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. So let's talk about the book. Obviously, how can we not, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very excited about this. So what is this as much a manual as it is sort of it sounds like it's more than one thing, right? So obviously it talks a little bit about your journey, but tell us more about sort of how this and the impetus to publish it too, right? I mean, that was obviously you at some point you're like, this makes sense.
Yeah, well, I had written a chapter for Geek Therapy. Sorry, I had the book behind me, Integrating Geek Culture into Therapy book. But like it was this thing, it was so frustrating to write that chapter because I was like, this needs to be a book. Like I'm trying to take a book's worth of knowledge and distill it into a chapter. This isn't working. And like it was fine. The chapter's fine. It's a good chapter. Like in large credit to my co-authors of that chapter. But I was just like, it needs to be a book. And I had been wanting to write a book, but I kind of had that on the back burner. And then actually someone from Norton approached me and was like, hey, do you want to write a book on this? And so I was like, yes, please, I will do that. And I actually really started writing the book at Gamehole Con in gosh, it must have been 2021. Yeah. And then I turned it in while I was at Gary Con in 2022. So in that short little bit of time, I wrote this whole book.
Wow.
But it's split into really two sections. The first section is foundations and the research and where we can use tabletop gaming. So really doing a deep dive into what studies there are on tabletop gaming, which unfortunately is not much. Where we can pull from other forms of therapy, such as play therapy, music therapy, drama therapy, and so on, and how we can kind of understand the mechanisms of change that happen. What is it in these games that is really powerful, and then what to do with that. The second half of the book is really a look at the practical aspects of running games. I talk through issues of diversity, inclusion, ethics, how to document groups, how to run therapeutic encounters, how to pick your gaming system, talking with the people who are going to be your referral sources, and all of that, and then giving an example, start to finish, here's how you would think through running a group.
That's great. And so in terms of, you mentioned this about how you pick a game, right? So I think there's probably most people figure it's Dungeons and Dragons and therapy, right? I guess I'm guessing that's not the only answer in terms of how you approach this. So what's the thinking in terms of distinguishing between the different types of games and what makes sense for why? Because we always struggle with this, right? Which is, we look at this with kids games, right? They're like, oh, let's play kids games. And what happens, especially with little kids, which I have with my kids, is like the first thing they do is they don't want to kill things. And you're like, oh, well, D&D is kind of about that. Doesn't mean it can't be other things, but you end up with a, let's just go kill stuff kind of conversation. And you're like, well, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the game, or maybe a different version of that approach, right? And certainly the spectrum of role-playing games is massive, much to the frustration of them who are trying to get people to play something else. But, I imagine there's that sort of range matters a lot when you're approaching therapy. So how does that figure in?
Well, I don't think there's such a thing as the right gaming system for therapy. Even my friends at Game to Grow who created their Critical Core, which is designed to be used. I mean, it's D&D. It's a streamlined D&D system,
right?
And that's fine. It's great. I'm not poo-pooing on them at all, but I just don't think there's such a thing as a therapeutic system. Just like So I started off my path as a music therapist. I suck at playing guitar. This is why I am not a music therapist. And that is not me just saying that. The department head of the music therapy department said either take off a year and become a good guitar player or change your major. So I changed my major.
Okay.
But music is used as a tool to help facilitate goals that are not related to playing music, right? And so in applied gaming is what we refer to this as. The game is used as a tool to teach skills that are not necessarily related to the game. And so like D&D is no more therapeutic than R&B is, where at like the cipher system is no more therapeutic than rap is. Like there's not just as there's no such thing as like the most therapeutic music out there. There's no such thing as the most therapeutic gaming system out there. It's, does the gaming system allow you to teach the things you want to teach in a way that is effective for you? But the biggest thing is, do you know the rules well enough to run the game? Like I'm a big fan of Emberwind. I think it's a really cool system. I've played it. I like it. I don't know it well enough to run it though, and I don't want to spend the time to learn it.
Right.
Like it's great, but it also has some limitations in there that I'm not the biggest fan of. Cipher system is also pretty cool. Very easy. It's maybe a little bit too open.
Yeah.
But
Depending on the
fine.
person. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Pathfinder, definitely combat focused, right? That it is all about power, being a power gamer. And like those things are great and awesome. But it's what works for you. I know D&D the best, so I run D&D. I've got kids I have so many gaming systems. Like I really want to start using 10 Candles because I think 10 Candles could be a really amazing system for like a one-day intensive group.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to do some pilot studies. I'm going to run it for therapists first to see before diving in. But like that is the biggest thing about the gaming system is like you want to be comfortable running the game. If it's not a system that you're going to enjoy, if it's not something you know how to run, it doesn't matter if maybe it addresses social anxiety a bit more than the system you're not going to be good at it, therefore it's not going to be effective.
Right. Yeah. So for sure, obviously proficiency sort of all around, I imagine, is part of it. Is there a difference in terms of multiple sessions versus one session? Is there sort of a feeling, obviously there's certainly attachment to some of this, right? So any gamer can tell you, the longer you play or I always say there's nothing like pitching a D&D game to someone. You're like, it's not really a board game, but you're going to play it for like 9 months. What's your schedule like? And people like, if you said that, they're like, are you, what?
Yeah.
It's not like a 4-hour game, but it could be, right? Sometimes there are games for sure that are. So does that impact in terms of how you approach this with therapy?
Well, so again, this is where we're borrowing from things, right? So the typical length of a psychological group is 12 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at most CBT groups, process groups, everything, 12-week manuals, 12-week protocols. And so we can build off of that 12-week campaign. I usually end up doing 10 weeks. Not because I think 12 is too long. It's just usually by the time my group starts and finishes, I'm timing it with school vacations and stuff. And 10 weeks tends to be what works. So it's having that time to be that character and to dive into them and dive into the story. Usually you see around like early sessions, session 0 is the first meeting, session 1, 2, that's where the group's kind of getting together. By session 3 and 4, they're starting to figure out how to work together. And usually by session 6, you're really starting to see some of the therapy, like people are getting it and they're connecting and they're starting to have those growth moments. And so it's awesome. And we've got that. In the when I was running the games virtually because of COVID, I wasn't seeing that growth happen until session 8. So it was still happening, which is really important. But it was slower. Yeah. And I just think it was like, there is something about being physically at the table together and having the crosstalk and being able to, connect. And like, if somebody had a quick question of like, what does this spell do? And being able to ask their neighbor rather than having to pause the whole thing and be like, I don't understand what my spell does. I think that stuff makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can imagine it does. I mean, certainly from running my campaigns in person versus virtual, it's a different speed. to say the least, and people's tolerance too for how long you can do it, and it's a different. I'm laughing because one of my friends was like, well, we're gonna play and we're gonna play like 8 hours, and we're like, oh, what's that like? It's been so long since we've done sessions that long. So this is, I mean, if it's a party, which great, again, that's sort of a D&D-ism. Is this group therapy as a group then? Is it sort of your traditional?
It's group, yeah. The ones I run are groups.
Yeah.
There are people out there who run duet games, and those seem to work really well too. For me, though, like because the people I'm working with typically have social anxiety, you need to be in a social situation in order to invoke the anxiety. And so you need those peers and you need that feedback. So it's really important for the work I do specifically.
That's great. And of course, this is all sort of built into the nature of gaming, where theoretically, because it's not always a solo game. That's sometimes it's a video game. So now you're talking more about teamwork and sort of working together with goals that may or may not be well defined. It's interesting too. You as you talk about systems, part of that is also the power curve, right? So I guess if you're talking about 10 weeks, people would probably see a significant difference in their characters if they level up or advance in some way, shape, or form. Is that part of the sort of the therapy is having empowerment, I guess is the phrase.
Yes. Yeah. And that's really what my groups are about. Like I see myself as being in the empowerment business, as a psychologist. Like I'm going to help teach you how your brain works so that you are better able, to face your depression, anxiety, social interactions, whatever it is, with more knowledge and power. So sorry.
No worries.
So it's, feeling more powerful. And something that I suggest for therapeutic encounters is when you're doing character creation with your group is to ask your players like, hey, how do you want to see your character grow and change over the course of this campaign? Like they're going to level up. They're going to face challenges. How do you want them to change? What skills do you want them to develop? What internal difficulty do you want them to overcome? Like, what would that look like? And we get that growth mindset built into it. So that way the players are essentially then giving consent to provide these opportunities. So like if they're saying, I want to learn how to trust more, it's like, cool, I'm going to throw a bunch of NPCs your way who are very, very helpful. They might not be skilled, but they are helpful and they will be here to help you.
Right.
And so we can start to learn, like, do we trust? What does that look like? And I bribe my players slightly. Behaviorists would call this reinforcing them by letting them know that I have chosen a specific magic item for their character. Should they reach their emotional growth point with their character is rewarded with cool magic item.
Nice. That's great. I love that. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that power cycle. One of the things I always say is, we start out, I always say that I think the growth of a lot of gamers is you start out playing D&D and you end with Call of Cthulhu, right? And we always like, well, why is that, right? And some of that is D&D has inherent to it this idea that hard work is rewarded, that growth and riches or whatever else, depending on your goals, is possible. And your character, if they continue along, gets stronger, more powerful, and you're a little bit more in control of your destiny. Whereas Call of Cthulhu flips that, right? It is entirely about how do you sort of spiral in a way that is entertaining. And that takes a very different perspective that is, depending on where you're at in your life, is disempowering or entertaining because you've done the sort of the powerful growth thing. So it is interesting to your point of how obviously the system, like you said, there's no one right system, but certainly the system affects how you have these dialogues with folks. And it must be very rewarding to see them feel more powerful at the end because their characters, they're going to, as long as they show up, right, and they sort of play along, they will grow. Which,
exactly.
I know in life doesn't always feel as, and jobs, careers does not quite move that linearly as we would hope, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, and the other thing I do is like, I give experience points to the characters get the experience points, but it's for the behaviors of the players. Right. So being ready on your turn, supporting one another, using like the redirect, we talk a lot about like yes and or no butting.
That's great.
So if somebody has an idea, we don't go no, right? It's like, well, okay. Or we could do something like that. It's like, we're going to validate, we're going to listen. And so, how do we have constructive feedback? How do we deal with, arguments and disagreements in the group. And then if stuff comes up, emotional stuff, we pause the game and we process. I had one group where we stopped and we processed for like a half hour, a pretty significant amount of our gaming time. And like the player, when they kind of had calmed down, they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like we've wasted so much time in the game." And like all the rest of the group is like, "Are you kidding? We're going to get like 200 XP for this."
And we had talked about this before we got started the call, but part of the diversification of gaming, part of the expansion of the group is that people are coming to the game with different experiences and traumas included as part of that experience. So certainly having the space and the ability to pause, because role playing can go anywhere, right? Theoretically, the concept is anything can be attempted. So if you're role playing, obviously within the confines of hopefully a game master who's not going to make it a nightmare scenario, but conversely, there are challenges, there are things, and is that a factor you take into account where you have players trying to overcome? So in other words, you're actually putting some obstacles in for them to grow because that's something they're working on.
And that's where asking for those emotional growth, like I started. So this is lessons learned from Dr. Connell. It used to be like, okay, I know this player needs to work on this skill, so I'm going to put this skill in the game. And even though it was a therapeutic game and I had consent to work on this stuff with them, they didn't like that. Like they would work on it, but it was not good. And so, but when I flipped it, I said, how do you want your character to grow and change? Suddenly it wasn't about the player learning these skills anymore. It was their character.
Right.
And it really does seem like players project their stuff onto their characters pretty consistently. Asterisk research needed.
Right.
But, then we have consent, so like if a player's kind of freaking out about, having to trust somebody or having to face go into a dark confined space or something. Right. It's like, hey, you don't have to do this. You did say, though, that this is the fear you wanted your character to overcome. And so if you want your character to overcome this, me as your game master, I have to put these obstacles in front of you.
Right. You
don't have to do them. Like your character can walk away right now. That is a legitimate option.
Right.
But it is there. It is an option, and that kind of helps the person go, oh, yeah. And then, if they're getting towards session 7, 8, and I might also go, and remember, you get a cool magic item. So it's really helpful in that way because I do use Monty Cook's Consent in Gaming form.
Yes.
A modified version of it. It's great free PDF. And I email that out to all the participants before the group starts, and then they send it back. And then during our session 0, we go over the topics that came up, and then we talk about other things. I'll talk about finishing moves. Like if we're fighting something, like how in detail do you want, can I say like you eviscerate its bowels, or do you want me not to say, like, where's the line with that? And I use these little poker chips. So I developed what I'm calling the dynamic safety tools, where we're basically combining lines and veils, the X card, and the Luxton technique kind of all into one. And so the lines and veils are the consent forms that we use. And then we have, instead of just an X card, though, I have a pause button, a little yellow face, like an emojicon with like a little line face, and then a smiley face, and then the X. So the X, the X is obviously thrown if we get to a topic that is a no-go. But the idea of the little like flat-faced emojicon is, hey, we're getting near something. I'm not loving this right now.
Right.
And the pause button is for if somebody needs to talk about something, where it's like, okay, so you all know my character is afraid of spiders. Player am not, but my character is. And now there's big spider webs here. So my character is starting to show signs of a panic attack. And and then it's like, okay, cool. Like, how do we want to role play this out? And we could talk about that. But like having those buttons allows for everybody to have some agency at their table.
Have you seen the latest Puss in Boots movie?
Yes. Oh my God. It was better than it had any right to be.
Yes, it really was, especially this late in the franchise. But I've seen people talk specifically about Puss having a panic attack and how the dog, I already forgot the dog's name, but he helps. Pooch, I don't remember his name. Yeah. And his, the idea that's how a therapy dog works. But somebody saying like, wow, we actually saw a character, experience something that people felt. They absolutely were like, I've been there, and wow,
Mhm.
it really did a good job of showing, and also how he was able to cope with it. So it's just fascinating. It was like, even as we have a cat wearing boots dealing with some of these things that, so we can certainly do it in our role playing games if it's coming up in Puss in Boots. That's
For
amazing.
sure.
Do they
Yeah.
do the players have consensus? I mean, one of the things I think that's always a challenge, certainly with new everybody being new, I imagine that's a different animal, right? But when
Mhm.
you've got groups, if anyone knows anyone else, we've had this where it's always a little dicey, pun intended, with
Mhm.
one new player, right? So the one new player,
Yes.
and I always say, to your point, and you said this about the cycle, right? Probably game 2, 3, everybody, like, the characters have saved each other at that point, and they're gelling.
Yep.
But I imagine, especially, this is intense, that it's you, they are other factors, right? It's not just you and the person,
Mhm.
one person. How do you manage that in the context of this, especially with safety tools too,
Yeah.
right? Where some people may be like, I have a problem with that, and the other person's like, I don't care, that's not a big deal for me. So there's
Mhm.
probably rules of engagement you also have to manage, right?
Yeah, so each group is closed, which in therapy terms means once we've started, nobody can join.
Hmm.
I'll maybe make an exception for that between weeks 1 and 2. But once the campaign has started, it is closed. We are together and we've created this thing. I do let players keep their characters if they come back to another group.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so we have oftentimes I will have players of different levels, and that works fine. To all the game masters out there who are like, you can't, everybody has to be the same levels. It's like, no, they don't. They do not at all. A level 1 player can still contribute to a fight that is challenging to level 7 players. Like,
Right.
they really can. To go
Yeah.
back to my love of Willow. Um, so like it's okay to have those discrepancies. I like though having those character bonds. If you're familiar with Sly Flourish's Lazy Dungeon Master
Hmm.
method, he's got a table in the Lazy Dungeon Master Returns where you roll a d20 and it gives you a bond that you have to another person in the group. And so
Hmm.
like I will do this where it's sort of interesting because I actually don't expand on it in the story very much, but like during session 0, I'll have each player roll 2 d20s and assign it to their right and left. And then it creates 2 bonds to the players that they're sitting next to.
Oh, wow.
And it's really cool because like the players then start coming up with their stories. Like I had one group roll and like 4 people in the group ended up being in business together. And so this whole thing, like they were trying to figure out what are we selling? What did we do? And it's just great because like doing that brings them in. And so like I have had it before where I had one person join a group that was continuing, so new session, but almost everybody returned, and then we had one new player.
Right.
But had them roll some dice, and they figured out that they knew somebody, and it was like, and then they started, this one player's like, I think my character's going to know your characters. Like, okay, how do we know each other? And then they started figuring it out, and it's like, okay, we got this. And then bringing them in, and the other players, were just wonderful, being like, oh, your character, I don't even remember what their character was, but like, oh, my character is intrigued by what your character's species and wants to know more. And so just kind of bringing that together it's great. It is so much fun.
Yeah, it's amazing. I laugh because there's been a few books about this where
Mhm.
you see people go away to camps, they go away to escape rooms, they go away, and you're like, yeah, that's D&D, guys. That's role playing games. Actually, that's what you're with the
Yeah.
experience of why business keeps trying to get people in these sort of safe but certainly challenging situations as a group is
Mhm.
because it absolutely builds bonds. And
Yep.
and certainly that's sort of the primal elemental piece of this, right? Which is that playing together and overcoming challenges as a group is great. You hopefully don't need too much of an excuse to get there, but it helps, particularly when people are new, right? Because they're new to each other and
Yeah.
they're new to the situation. So that's amazing. I mean, this is fantastic to hear this. And so your book comes out next week,
Tuesday.
right?
Yeah, next
Tuesday.
week,
Very
Tuesday. Yep.
exciting. Very exciting. And obviously with this being out, do you feel like there is this for everyone? I mean, I certainly I'm learning a lot based on the conversation. To me, it sounds like it's the CAR-PGA would absolutely be interested, but beyond that, what do is it just for therapists, or what's your sort of
Uh,
target audience?
I'm hoping that it's a bridge. I
Mhm.
wanted to bring gamers to psychology and psychologists to gamers. It certainly is more geared towards therapists, psychologists, particularly with the research and talking about running groups and everything like that. But like, I wanted to give clues to all the people who play tabletop games and go, why does this game make me feel things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And like, why is it that like my D&D memories feel like real memories? Like I was actually just watching a behind the scenes thing from the cast of Critical Role talking about like how like one of the players was saying how I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I remember every freaking moment of that one game.
Yeah.
And what happened and where, and it's like, why do we encode those memories so deeply? Like, why does this stuff matter so much? And so I really hope that through the literature review and the science I talk about, it can really clue them in and to kind of help them better understand. And then I'm also, to that bridge of gamers to psychologists, I'm hoping some of them will go, wow, this is cool. I want to know more about how this works.
Right.
So this is my devious plan to expand both pools that I'm a part of.
Well, now it's out on the internet, or it will be. So not too devious, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I fully endorse this nefarious plan. I think that's fantastic.
Yes.
It is interesting. And I feel like I read it in the summary that, obviously there are other sort of these magic circle sort of permeable situations, improv, right? So there's definitely been some of that here. I think what's probably so surprising to some folks, I mean, I think again, role players are probably not surprised, is just how much transitive properties there is between sort of all that, right? It is all sort of in this mix. That's why I love to talk about escape rooms, because I was like, oh, people are finally getting it. Like the intensity. I mean, now you're putting them physically, so there's less of the imagination sometimes, but they get like, there's a game master sort of nudging you along, and you're in this room, and it's just such an intense experience. And it is one of those things that it could just replicate that more, maybe without having to build an entire room with a vault and everything in it. I think we could do so much more. So I think this is amazing, and I'm really excited that you're able to launch this. So what do you think's coming next? I mean, will you do more of this, or I mean, maybe it's too early because the book's not out yet, but
the book's not out yet. Well,
next?
I've just opened up my own practice with my business partner, Dr. Ryan Kelly, Health Quest Innovative Therapeutics. So we're getting that off the ground. Like our group room is going to be like an entire D&D room, essentially. We're trying to make it like a wizard's library is the
fantastic
aesthetic we're going for. So like once that's opened, the what next from there. There's another book that I want to write because I was trying to find like an excellent summary of like, here's what music therapy is. Here's what art therapy is. Here's what equine therapy is. And it doesn't exist. And so I want to make that book exist. I want to reach out to people who are heads of their fields in those different disciplines and be like, let's all agree on a format and each write a chapter in this format and put it together in a book. So that way, people who are interested in like, what the heck is art therapy? How does one become an art therapist? Is it efficacious? Like it can kind of answer those questions, just to give that basics, like quick definition of this is what art therapy is. Here's where you find an art therapist. If you want to be an art therapist, here's what that training looks like. So I'm very excited about that. I want that to be the next.
That's exciting. Is this sort of an electronic initiative as well, or more book oriented, or what are you thinking?
Probably book oriented. But it'd be cool to get that out there. It's in the works. I have to see, I'm working on getting the proposal together and finding my authors, and making sure I'm casting a wide enough net to get, make it a useful resource, because I could definitely see this being something that a lot of just people studying therapy of any kind, behavior therapies or psychology, and these alternative art therapies, it would just be helpful to know, like, okay, so this is what this looks like. What, gosh, I'm trying to help people with this. What would that look like? But yeah, that's something that's next for me.
That's fantastic.
But that's coming after we open the doors of the practice and get all of that going.
Right. Yeah. And like, let me just get the book out, please, before we start.
Yeah. I gotta get the book out. Gotta get the doors open at the new practice, and then maybe take a rest. I don't know.
Rest? Come on. Long rest, short rest. Short rest, D&D terms.
Yeah, short rest. Short rest.
Yeah. So now is your practice, are you doing both like online then and in person, or so you're doing both of those, right? Combination?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I'm part of the PsyPact. So that is an interdisciplinary, or interjurisdictional practice where a bunch of states have signed on and agree to recognize the license of other states. You have to apply for it. I have my National Register of Health and Human Services, my American Board of Professional Psychology board certification. I've been licensed now in 4 states. PsyPact was the worst application I've ever done. It was so hard.
Oh man.
And it just because like it was asking for data that was so old, and I'm like, I don't remember who my practicum supervisor, like, how do I don't know. I found them on LinkedIn. Here's their LinkedIn information. How, it was just really hard, but it's worthwhile because now over 30 states are a part of this.
Wow.
And if the current list of states that have pending legislation I'll sign in, it will be something like 42 states.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's so wonderful because with Geek Therapeutics, one of the big pushes we have is that being a geek is its own cultural identity. And so having a therapist who understands your culture and understands your cultural identity is incredibly important. And this kind of initiative opens the door for, somebody who is, like treating anxiety and autism in women is one of my specialities. And so maybe there is a gamer living in New Hampshire who's autistic and super duper anxious and really wants to feel like she can connect with her therapist on those things. Hi, I'm here and I can practice in New Hampshire, even though I physically live in North Carolina. It's really wonderful in that way.
That's fantastic. And, one of the things that I've discussed before with this is, the acceleration, which I don't know if it's decelerating or we're getting a correction of sort of the remote world, right? I just saw an article yesterday about monitor sales have plummeted. Well, they were like, well, they've plummeted because people were buying them massively along with computers and other stuff from the remote, during the pandemic. And it sounds like essentially there's a correction. Whether or not there should be one is a whole nother discussion, but now people are sort of going back in person in a lot of ways. I imagine that affects sort of both the gaming world and sort of therapy as well in terms of how you engage, right? So have you seen this is we have quite a few folks, which is great. We want to make sure we open it for questions, but my last question then is, have you seen that? I mean, you've been working through this. I assume the gaming was sort of in parallel. Have you seen that change sort of the engagements in terms of what you're doing? I mean, one of the concerns that we always ask is, did it create more stresses to this, hopefully open up more opportunities as well, but, was the pandemic, sort of creating these sort of, either it was there and we didn't know about it, or now it brought those things to the surface?
Like you can't go through a pandemic without it causing stress, right? Like that's, of course, it's going to cause problems and stuff, but like I've been practicing telehealth since 2009. Like this is nothing new for me. Like when I was in the military, like we were using telemed. And it was a big initiative and it was something that I've been doing. And just like the pandemic was like the world finally caught on. And like we finally started getting research that like, yes, this is just as effective as being in a room with somebody. For groups, we do know that it's effective, but again, like I was experiencing slower than it is for face-to-face.
Right.
But, in many ways, telemed is more effective than face-to-face, especially for certain, agoraphobia, depression, like those ones where it's really hard for the person even just to get out of their house.
Right.
I have a couple of depressed clients who like they get on their telehealth sessions and they're still in bed.
Wow.
And so like if it had been a face-to-face session, they wouldn't have made it. They just would have no-showed. But because it was telehealth, they're like, yeah, I can't get out of bed. And then I get to be there for them and be like, all right, swing your legs out. Come on, go stand up, like stand, stretch. Let's go walk, do some paces around your room while we talk. And that's, a really helpful thing to do. And so like, yeah, I think there is a lot of stress and change, but I also think it's just really see the positive of impact because like before 2020, PsyPact had like, I think 4 or 5 states. It wasn't very big. And the fact that now it's almost all the states.
Right.
Like that's huge.
That's fantastic. And of course, what better way to sort of stretch your imagination in role playing because you don't need to go anywhere. So the two are absolutely complementary in great ways. It's
Yeah.
just bringing them together, right? And in the right place, right time. So for the person who can't get out of bed, they, not that they shouldn't, they should, but
Yeah.
it's not, they don't have to go somewhere necessarily, right? To your point. And like I said, you don't need the props of an escape room. They can do it
Yeah.
just through dialogue and imagination. So that's fantastic. What a huge
Yeah.
opportunity. I feel like we're at the cusp of something. I keep saying this, and maybe I need to stop because I'm probably saying it every year. I'm like, something's changing. First it was sort of the growth of the virtual world, and now we've got AI sort of talking back to us, and there's so many things going on.
Well,
but it feels like you're at the forefront of something.
Yeah, well, and like as horrible as the whole thing with the OGL was, like, how cool to see the community unite and like Project Black Flag from Kobold Press
Right.
and the Orc license coming together, and like all these other companies now are like, yeah, let's make something.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be D&D. And
Totally.
I think that's great. Like I'm still gonna play D&D, but like I'm really excited to see what Kobold Press comes up with. I love their monsters. I love what they've done. So let's see it,
Right. Yeah. And look, the industry, there's nothing like threatening an industry to get it to grow. And there's nothing, like I said, like a good party, we'll all be good friends after we get attacked by the dragon because we saved each other's butt. So I think the industry is going through the same, where they were like, man, that dragon almost ate us. We are going to have to work together and come up with some new creative solutions. And I think that's definitely happening. That's definitely happening.
I know.
Well, I do want to open it. Ted,
sorry, yeah. Sorry, I was just gonna say I do find it so funny that Hasbro's like, we need to monetize D&D, and the community's like, you make toys, give us toys.
I know. The number of articles I've written about sort of the underpinnings of what that is. Most of it, I won't go into all of it, but the short of it is that business has difficulty with what gaming is, and their closest model is video games.
Yeah.
So they are engaging in and the video game industry, by the way, borrowed from the movie industry, right? So there's a lot of sort of not great habits that are definitely driving, whether people even realize it or not, driving approaches to things. And that's all I'll say, because otherwise we could do a whole separate session and you would just hear me talk. So I don't want to do that. But Ted asked, are you familiar with the work of Omar Diniz? I don't know if I said that right.
I don't think so. I'm looking to see if it's a citation in here. I am, okay, not a citation in my book. I am not familiar with Omar Diniz. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he used to be a member of our committee. He dropped out a couple years ago, but I think in the late 1980s, he was doing work with role-playing and therapy and into the 90s. But he was actually a member of our committee for a while.
Oh, that's awesome.
But he's in Brazil.
Okay.
So I'm sure none of his work is published in English.
Yeah, this is probably in Portuguese. Yeah. I know in English there's not. It's like it ends at like 86, and then there's one study in like 1991, and then nothing again until the 2000s.
Yeah, but I figured that since he was doing that in the late 80s, that might be something that would be known, but maybe not.
Yeah, I did not come across his work.
And I'd be remiss in mentioning Adam Davis was on from Game to Grow in December with us. So we did talk to him, which was exciting.
He's Game to Grow folks are awesome.
Yeah, they're great. Other question, Ted, did you have something else? I don't know if that was your question. Other question.
Maybe a comment. I guess there are a lot of times where you're introducing role-playing games to people who have never played them. And one thing I think is to go with, it seems to me like to go with something super simple, and nothing could be simpler than fudge. I'm not familiar. I don't know if you know it or not, but it's an extremely simple option. I have the 10th anniversary edition, and it's got a work example, which is called 5-point fudge. Very easy to teach to people. The only problem is you have to get the special dice.
Yes, you got magic dice.
Yeah. But that's like super simple. Anybody can pick it up like in 5 minutes.
Awesome. Oh, that's cool.
I see Bill literally raised his hand. There you go, Bill. Now you're on screen too. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question actually is very similar to what Ted just asked, and that was, how easy is it getting non-geeks into this? And because I'd never heard of anybody doing this on this kind of clinical level. It's really fascinating. But and are the rules in any way an obstacle, or are they an actual aid?
I think they're an aid. So I actually don't really have a problem getting new people to play. You know, my groups have largely been kids, so teenagers, so 13 and up. So it's sort of like parents are like, wait, they're going to sit around and talk to people for 2.5 or 2 hours and not have a screen. Yes, they're doing it. So like, they're kind of like, I don't know why my parents signed me up. I'm just here. But I introduce them like when, especially if they've never played before, I build their character for them, even if they have played. I use D&D Beyond. And I'll sit down and be like, what species do you want your character to be? Anything. There is anything. We will figure, tell me what you want. We've got it. Right. And then it's like, cool. Are you a fighter or use magic? And, if they're like fighter, it's like, okay, so you imagine yourself being like more of a knight? Are you kind of like a sneaky guy? Are you more like archery, like fight? You maybe like doing more fighting with your hands, and just asking those little questions to kind of pull it out. And rather than showing them all the options, just letting them kind of narratively tell me what they want. And then creating, asking how their character grew up and printing off the character sheet. And I tell everybody, like, don't worry about all the numbers yet. I know this is overwhelming. It's actually not going to be too hard once you get used to it. I show them the 20-sided die. I'm like, anytime I'm asking for a dice roll, this is what I'm asking for. And this is part of why I like being face-to-face, is because I can walk around the table and be like, okay, so we're rolling perception. You're going to roll your D20, add this number, then we're going to go on from there. And also, like, one of the things I like to do is to buddy up my players. So if I have experienced players and non-experienced players, I ask them to sit next to each other and to work together and to share character sheets and to help each other out in that way. But yeah, everybody's a geek on some level. And I think like it's finding what that person is a geek about and bringing it into the game. Whether it's they're a sports geek, they're a numbers geek, they're, Marvel geek, whatever it is. It's like, okay, what kind of characters do you love? What things do you love? What are you excited about? Cool. Let's bring that into this world.
Very cool.
Fantastic. Tim, did you have a question? I don't know if Tim may have stepped away.
Me too.
There's a Tim. Hi, Tim.
I actually do. So a lot of the tools you're using, when I see them applied, their origins of them that I've seen are the X cards, all this, come out of indie game. And you mentioned 10 Candles, which is an indie game, story game. But you're doing D&D, which is very crunchy, very traditional. What other story games are you looking at? Especially because the ethos of story games is often about inclusivity and accessibility and giving control back to the players.
I haven't been going to look at too many. So I was talking with Mike about this at the beginning. I actually have a learning disability. I'm dyslexic. And unfortunately, one of the things for that is like learning rule systems is really, really hard for my brain. So even though 10 Candles is it seems like it's pretty straightforward and easy, it's been very hard for me to learn. And so like I want to use more of the narrative-based games and like the indie games, but I just haven't had the chance to. I think 10 Candles could become an incredible one-day experience for people. I think there's a lot of potential there, and probably with a lot of other indie narrative games as well. But I think there are, because of the training program I helped to develop with Leyline, there's hundreds of people now have been trained. And so I think there are people who are using those games out there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Any other questions? So, where can we find you, Dr. Connell?
Yeah. At hqpsych.com is the website for my practice. Under our team, I have a page there. You can find me on all the social media platforms. I'm at Megan Sidey.
Excellent.
So,
and
Facebook,
we want to buy your book. So where do
Yes.
you knew you put in the chat, but I don't know if the chat shows up the recording. So I want you to say it out loud.
Yeah. So my book is available anywhere books are sold up until Tuesday. If you use the code TTRPG or TTRPT20, you get 20% off at Norton.com. But you do have to pay for shipping at Norton. So I guess like it offsets the shipping cost. But it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, I know a few game stores are actually going to be carrying it as well. And it is also going to be available as an audiobook through audiobooks.com, same day as the print version. And it will be an ebook and everything like that as well.
Fantastic. How can we support you with this? I mean, obviously this is great work. It's certainly in the realm of the CAR-PGA. We love it. I'm sure our members going to buy it. So how can we support you with all this? What else can we do?
I mean, the biggest thing that I want to see with this is research. I actually have a whole section in the back of my book that is recommended research, like research questions that people, so this is my appendix. Please use these as your thesis.
Yes.
So if any of you are working with students or people who are looking to do research, we need these foundational studies. Mike was telling me a bit about the history of your organization and that it was kind of in a response to the Satanic Panic. And I postulate in my book that I think the Satanic Panic is why we don't have research. It scared people away from writing grants, and we have a lot of ground we need to make up. We need to show that, just the basic questions of do people actually get psychological benefit out of playing tabletop gaming? And is that psychological benefit increased when it's run by a psychologist or applied game master? I think that is a very easy study to do. And we don't even have that. And so these things need to be done.
Yes, Bill.
I actually have a question about that related to Satanic Panic and stuff. Do you ever get any fear from parents or any people who react immediately to that stereotype of mazes and monsters and people going crazy by playing the games?
I have not, and I'm in the South, and I have had several players who go to a Catholic school.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Lucky.
Yeah, I think Bill's probably heard my stories because Bill's probably been on half of these calls. But I've been traumatized because I definitely in school had teachers go after me. So I'm always I've taught gaming to scouts, to my scout troop, and I'm always just is someone going to find? I feel like any day now someone's going to call me on it and be like, you or something's going to turn south and negative about the gaming. But it really hasn't happened. In fact, most of the people are like, oh yeah, like Stranger Things. And sort of at most just amused how geeky it is, but that was basically it. But it's been, and then what's funny is then I introduced it and the scouts were like, yeah, I have a campaign. You're like, oh, okay. Never mind.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's really fun. I love it when I'm asking people, do you know the game? And so many are especially because my groups are girls, and there's been a lot where it's I know the game, I want to play, but I can't find anybody who will let me play with them. It's all right, come on in. Let's do this.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. Well, I want to be sensitive to our time. We're just about at the hour.
Ted put his hand up, though.
Oh, go ahead, Ted.
Yeah. Are you mostly working with minors?
Yes, I finally got my first adult group going, and then the pandemic happened.
Okay. I guess my question would be concerning the kids. Have you ever asked their parents if they had played RPGs when they were younger?
Sometimes that's not an explicit question that I ask as I'm doing the intake. A lot of times the parents will volunteer that and say that if they have or haven't. But I know for my Catholic school kids, their parents did not play. So
thank you, Ted. Okay, so thank you so much. This has absolutely been a pleasure. It's wonderful to speak to you. Certainly, to your point, I think the research in the book is something that the CAR-PGA can engage with for sure, at the minimum, besides buying the book. We will be singing your praises. As we said in the beginning, you're welcome to join us as well. We'd love to sort of support you in any way we can. And what we'll do is we'll take this recording, we will put it in our newsletter. We'll make sure everybody knows about it. And we'll share any of the notes as well as the links, so where folks can purchase the book and also follow your work.
Sounds great.
So don't go anywhere. I'll stop the recording, but thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.